you to take a little bit of time here to think about the context of what you're trying to accomplish when you enter into an analytics exercise. Let's just take a typical one. Right? You've got 50 variables that you're looking at, and you're trying to use those variables to understand how to improve operations, let's say. And within those variables, there are going to be 6 that matter. Right? So you've got all this data, big data, 6 that matter out of the 50 that you're looking at. What are your chances of getting that right? As you think about that for a second, I'll give you the statistics. 1 in 15 million are your chances of getting that right. You have a better chance of winning the lottery than randomly picking those 6 variables. So that's where analytics comes in and becomes potentially very impactful. Who has played roulette? I didn't do a poll for this one, but I'm sure that many of you are familiar with this game. Supposed to be the unbeatable game in the casinos, right? The one that cannot be beat. 2004, May, London. 3 people walk into the Ritz. And over the course of 2 days, win 1.3 million pounds on the roulette table. That, as you may imagine, got the casino a little interested in what was happening. And so they asked them to come and talk for a few minutes, and what they found is that these people had a camera in their phone. And when they would spin the wheel and then the ball, they were taking pictures. And those pictures were going back to a big data machine, if you will, and running some very robust analytics that they'd created, and using that to predict where it would land. And by using the images and the analytics off the images, they were able to very accurately predict where on that wheel that ball was going to land, or where there wasn't a good prediction, know when not to place a bet. And 1.3 million pounds later, they had figured out how to beat roulette. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about using big data and analytics to change the environment that you're working within, right? To change those odds. So it's not 1 in 15 million, right? Pick the 6 out of 50 that matter, but you're using the data to drive your business that drives a very different outcome. So why is this important? You can see here some of the trends, and we'll talk about these a little bit, but for this sector, why I think this is most important in this industry in particular, is because of what's happening from a disruption standpoint. 2013, this is research we've done. 2013, there was 266 million in venture capital flowing into this sector, right? Sounds like a lot, but in the grand scheme of things, not a whole lot. Fast forward to last year, 2016, $2.8 billion of venture capital flowing into this sector. These are companies, investments in companies that are trying to do what you do on a daily basis in a very different way. And as we've researched them, we've found that there are probably somewhere around 10,000 of these out there. We certainly haven't looked at all of them. We haven't even looked at a percentage of them, really. But as we've looked at the category, what we found is that they have some things in common. These organizations are asset-light, information-rich. And what I mean by that is they're not out buying buildings and trucks and the sorts of things that are the asset base that you have. They're buying servers, and they're buying data scientists, and they're putting these networks together in very different ways, using the data to drive a very different profile and a very different cost structure. And as you look at what they're doing, it's a bit astounding, to be honest. I'll give you one example. This is from the US, a company called Onibag. And Onibag has set up a next-day network in 5 US states, covering 70 cities within those states, that covers 80% of the population. Right? A lot of numbers there to just say they've gotten big fast, and they cover almost everybody that matters in those geographies. They don't own a truck. They don't own a building. From what I can tell, they really don't even have all that many employees. I've met 5. I'm sure there are a few more. But what they do have is a really big computer. And very powerful analytics working on a mobile app. And how they've set up this network is they have a crowdsourced first mile that will come to your office. Let's say you're a small business mailing 10 packages. They'll come to your office and they'll pick up those packages, crowdsourced. They'll take them to the local bus station for the national bus operator, Greyhound bus line in the US, and they use the bus system for the line haul. And the bus system charges them almost nothing because that bus was going to travel anyway, and it's spare capacity on the bus that they would be utilizing, so any revenue is good revenue for this bus company. When it gets to the destination, they have crowdsourced the last mile delivery, and so somebody will pick it up at the bus station and bring it to the destination, bring it to the person's home or the other business where it's being transported. They are operating now in those 5 states. They set it up over the course of 6 months, right? From nothing to 6 months in those 5 states, overnight product. And according to them, they're getting 40% margin on that product. It's a better product because they'll come and pick it up, right? They get it straight from the home or the office of the person that needs it delivered. And it's an overnight product, right, which is competing with what these others offer, but they can do it at half the cost. And that's why they're gaining market share so rapidly, is because they've got a better, cheaper product that is all founded on using data in a different way to drive a different profile in the business. And so what we'll talk about today in this presentation is how you might use data in different ways to drive a very different sort of outcome. And I've tried to pull some very practical examples that are the things that matter most, where we're talking about optimizing for costs or growing revenue, those sorts of things. Those are the topics that I want to cover in these examples. And then I want to end this presentation talking about what we're seeing as kind of the new and emerging technologies, and in particular what we see as a powerful potential application of artificial intelligence. So with that, the first example is improving service. You all, I'm sure, have cross-border products, and you all, I'm sure, analyze the performance of those cross-border products and try and figure out what's performing well and what's not. And when you have a leg that is not performing, right, is not service compliant, you do a lot of investigation to understand why and figure it out and make take a lot of effort to improve the performance of that. This is from an actual client where we've done this, right? Using traditional BI methods that they had, like the reporting that they were gathering at that time, they were able to get to a 40% on-time rate, which is abysmal, right? That's horrible. You're better flipping a coin in some ways. What we did is we said, all right, let's take that data, all the variables that we could about what was happening in their cross-border network, run it through multivariate analytics to produce pockets where we could identify that were highly likely to fail. And as we ran it through that analysis, what we found is that we could get to a 95% on-time performance with very little operational change. And I'll give you one example of what we found in that exercise. One of the things that the analytics showed is that the parcels that were advanced, right, so given to the air carrier in this, does this have a pointer on it? Right, given to the air carrier early in this second leg, were more likely to fail than the parcels that were given to the air carrier for the second leg late. So, just to make sure that's clear, if coming out of your sortation facility, you gave it to them earlier than you were supposed to, it was going to be late. And if you gave it to them later than you were supposed to, it was going to be early. Make sense? Completely counterintuitive, right? But the data showed that clearly. The data was absolutely clear that that was happening. And so we said, that's weird. Let's send the team out there and figure out what was happening. And what we found is when the parcels were advanced to the air carrier, and so they gave it to them early, the air carrier was taking those and they were putting them in a holding bin back at the back of the facility. And sometimes they would remember to get them out of the holding pen and put them on the plane, and sometimes they wouldn't. But if you gave it to them late, they were very good at getting that onto the plane as fast as possible. And so the tolerance that had been built into the process, they were saying they needed it 2 hours before the plane, but it really turned out that if they got it anywhere as close to a half hour before the plane was scheduled to leave, that they would get it on that plane. Advanced, giving it to them early makes it late, giving it to them late makes it on time or early. Simple change to the process, right? All we did is we went to the sortation facilities and we said, don't give it to them early, don't give it to them late, just give it to them on time. Right? But never give it early, because it's going to get caught in that back office pen. A little bit about how that process worked, right? So you understand what we're talking about when we talk about using big data and analytics. The first is some basic root cause analysis of what was happening on those leg 2, right? The air leg delays that we then explored into operation systems that would provide the insight that we then linked together from the 20 different systems where this data was housed. And I'm sure you have something similar to this, right? Where you've got lots of different systems that have the data that you need to bring together. We brought that all together, those 20 systems, and then started the correlation analysis that then led to the multivariate analysis that then identified the top 20 conditions of when those legs were going to be laid. Right? So we went through that exercise to what it produced was something very simple that said, here are the conditions that cause lateness. Don't send your teams all over the place. Don't spend months analyzing it. Don't spend months running a proof of concept. This is what makes it late. Fix these 20. And we can give them very specific details of the 20. It departs from here. It arrives here. It's going on this airline. It's this type of parcels. Very specific details of exactly what was late, which allowed them to then pinpoint their exercise around fixing it. Prioritization exercise then happened with the operations folks that they then developed the Lean Six Sigma projects that went out and addressed those, right? They took out the top 20. And then they started measuring and tracking what was happening, right? What was the impact of the changes that they made? Most of these changes were simple changes to operations. Some of them were counterintuitive, like the example I gave you. But by making those simple changes to operations, they cut cost, but more importantly, got their service performance from 40% to 95%. And if I told you that you could do that, right? That you could significantly improve the service responsiveness of your products with almost no incremental cost. That's the sort of thing that I think you'd be interested in understanding, right? That's the power of analytics and using data. This next one is this concept of optimizing routes. And one of the things that we found is as you take the data off the GPS pings as the postmen are out doing their routes, you can get a very, very, very accurate picture of exactly what they're doing out there. So you can start to understand how far they're driving in line of travel and speed. You'll start to see things like they scanned and they're delivering the package, but they're moving at 20 miles per hour. Probably not at the doorstep like they're supposed to be when they make that scan. You can start to find where they're eating lunch and how long they're spending eating lunch. We can use these GPS pings to understand whether they're in the vehicle or out of the vehicle. We can use these GPS pings to see whether they parked the vehicle and walked up to the doorstep, or whether they parked the vehicle or drove the vehicle up the driveway and then threw the package at the doorstep. We can start to understand a whole lot. But you got to be careful with this data. Because what you'll find is that in addition to this very clear picture that emerges as you have data over time, there's also a lot of noise in that data. And I love what Aaliyah talked about of going from big data to small data. That's really the exercise that we're talking about when we're talking about analytics. It's going from all that data that you have down to the data that really matters that produces insight. And so what we did with all those GPS pings that were coming in is we ran this exercise called a clustering exercise to create what we call traversals. And a traversal, in very simple terms, is a length, a direction, and a speed, right? We wanted to break these routes into very discrete parts that had a distance that they would travel, a direction, right? So whether they were going up the street or down the street, and the speed that they were going at. And by creating those traversals, what we found is that you could create a very accurate prediction of what the driver was doing that could then be fed into an engine that would do a very accurate analysis of how to optimize that. So comparing how they drive today and scanning out, taking out all that erroneous data. I remember as I was looking at this, we found that there was this is a great example of erroneous or irrelevant data. As we were looking at the route that this one driver tracked, we found that every few days there was a ping down by the lake. Right, so he'd kind of do the route, stop midway through his route, and walk down. It looked like walk down to the edge of the lake. Stand at the edge of the lake for a little while and then walk back. And he would do this probably once a week. And he said there's no way that there's a delivery happening down at the end of the week, or down at the by the lake. What we found is that that's where he had one of his bathroom pit stops. Data that we didn't need, right? Wasn't relevant to optimizing the route, but that's the sort of data that comes in when you start to look at these pings. So, taking that, what they're actually doing, running it through the analytics to produce what they should be doing, right? What is the optimized route? And what we found is that if you do that for a route that has been optimized, right, manually optimized by inspection process that you'll probably put your routes through on an annual or every couple year basis, what we found is that if you run a route through that, you're going to get at least a 6% improvement from that optimization. That's 6% less minutes and miles necessary for that delivery route. If you greenfield it, right, and by greenfield I mean that instead of looking at one route, you look at the routes that are surrounding and you start to optimize in geographic regions. What we found is that you will take another 10 to 40% of the time and miles out of that route. 10 to 40% reduction in the time and distance that your postmen are traveling on a daily basis. And if you add that up over time, what you find is that you can produce significant savings in what is probably your biggest cost area today, which is last mile delivery. The next one, looking at how to drive incremental revenue. One of the things that we found that was challenging at a number of our clients is that they have their customer data spread across multiple systems. So we go in and we talk about using customer data in a very different way, and they would say, well, that's great, but my customer data is spread across 10 different systems, and none of them talk to each other, and none of them are interoperable. So step one in this process was to create that so we could get a comprehensive view of the customer data within the organization and start to use the variables across the interactions that customer was having with the post. From there, we asked the question, can we use that data to generate a model that accurately predicts who's going to stop mailing? Right? So where we're going to see either churn or reduction in the amount of volume that they're sending over to the post. And what we found is we could very accurately predict within a 6-month window of who was going to reduce or leave the mail. This was entirely focused, this analysis that you're seeing here was entirely focused on mail. So then we said, all right, now that we're good at predicting who's going and what they're going to do, can we now predict what customers are most likely to sign up for incremental services and at the largest amount? Right? So who should we send our sales team to talk to? Where should they be out talking based on most likely to convert at the highest rate? And what we did in that exercise is we ranked them for the sales organization. We said, start here. On Monday, every Monday, they get a list. On Monday, start with this one and work your way down that list. And we'll give you a new list the following Monday that will have a new ranking. But they're going to be ranked in the most likely to convert at the highest rate to the least. And what you see here is the results. That as they worked those highest ranked, they were over 20% more likely to convert. Right? They had to improve their conversion rate by over 20%. And more importantly, they improved the revenue from those by over 30%. Very simple process change. This wasn't new salespeople. This wasn't new products. This wasn't doing anything particularly different, except we told them which customers were most likely to buy their products and that they should organize their day in that fashion. And by reorganizing what they did, produced 20 and 30% improvement. Think about that, back to that original point that we started at, right? Figuring out the 6 that matter out of 50 is like winning the lottery. Using data to figure out the 6 is like beating roulette. This is using data to figure out the 6. And you're not changing operations, you're not increasing the sorts of things you're doing, you're just doing it smarter with data. The last one I want to talk about is this concept of optimizing operations. And what you see here is a specific problem that we were asked to look at called looping. And looping was defined in a few different ways, but the first 3, this bouncing sort of concept, is when we see parcels that are moving between facilities but never getting delivered, right? So it goes from facility A to facility B, back to A, back to B, back to A, back to B. And the client that we were working with on suspected that they had a problem, but they really didn't know how much, and more importantly, they didn't know what was causing it or where these problems were occurring. And so you see the examples of what looping is. On this one, I've tried to be very specific of exactly what it took to do this. Right? 5 terabytes of data, which is a lot of data. 10 months worth of scans, about 2.25 billion events that we pulled into this big data platform. Took us 2 months to get it in and produce the analysis, and it was roughly a $70K investment all in. What it produced is they found that they had 750,000 of these things looping on an annual basis. Far more than they had suspected. But more importantly, looping got much worse at peak. And you can understand why looping would get much worse at peak, right? When things are slow, you start to notice that you've got a parcel going back and forth and you can do something about it. At peak, everybody's just doing everything they can to move the content. What we found is that by eliminating those looping parcels, right, the unnecessary work that was occurring, that it was going to add 2% capacity to their network at peak. 2% incremental capacity by just eliminating the irrelevant work, the unnecessary work that was occurring. More importantly, it went from guessing to knowing. You know, this is the quote from the client. They no longer had to say, all right, we don't know exactly what's going on, let's send out a team and they'll watch it for a while and they'll come back and report from 6 different facilities. We can give them a very clear picture. These are the machines that cause the looping, these are the types of products that loop. Go fix those, pinpoint accuracy, go fix those, and 80% of your looping problem goes away. That's the power of knowing versus guessing. So a little bit about now artificial intelligence as we come to the to wrap this up. What you see here are kind of the types of artificial intelligence that we're looking at. Anywhere from natural language processing that you're seeing probably. Does anybody have an Amazon Echo, the Alexa? Is that something that's broadly used here? Or Siri on your phone, that sort of thing. That's what we're talking about, natural language processing. And what you find, what I find at least, is that natural language processing is annoying. It is a horrible way to interact with the device. And the reason for that is because the accuracy is at something between 85 and 90%. 85 to 90% sound like a bad percentage. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? But it's producing a bad result. And what we're finding is that as that gets to 98, that user interface becomes extremely useful. And the exchange, this is a research that we've done in our advanced analytics practice, and the exchange between the person and the user becomes robust and natural. You get to real natural language processing. But that's the power of artificial intelligence and the learning that occurs in there. And I'll give you one more example that's not in this sector, and then we'll come to this industry. Google Translate. You may have used it before. Google Translate got better in October of last year. I don't know if you noticed, but there's been a lot of studies of what happened. In September of last year, Google moved Google Translate off of its traditional platform and onto a machine learning platform. Overnight, Google Translate improved more than it had over the course of its existence. Overnight, got that much better. And as they started to analyze what was improving, because they noticed too in October that things were much better than they had been before, what they found is that it could do things that it hadn't been trained on. Right, so they had trained it from English to Korean and from Finnish to Korean, but they hadn't trained it from Finnish to Korean. Did I say that right? English to Korean. Anyway, they hadn't trained these processes, and what they found is that it was doing it. That it had figured out how to do these translations that it hadn't been trained on. And as they looked into why, what they found is that it had invented its own language. Google Translate now has its own language, and it translates everything into that language, and then it translates it back into the language that you wanted. And every day it gets better, because it's learning at what's working and what's not. That's the power of these artificial intelligence sorts of capabilities. So how does that apply to this industry? Quickly as we wrap up. A few things that we found. One, there are new highly reliable data sources out there, right, that allow you to do things that you couldn't do previously. You combine that with what retailers are investing in and putting the inventory closer to the consumer. Whether you look at what Amazon is doing, where they went from 50 facilities to over 500 facilities, or the ship-from-store sorts of models that brick and mortar are working at. They're putting the inventory closer, which means you now have to optimize a local, a city instead of a country. Combine that with what they're doing in predicting demand. All retailers, as I talk to our retail practice, and I spend about a third of my time with our retail clients, all of the retailers we talk about this being their highest priority. Being able to predict who will buy what, when they'll buy it, and where. And it's critical. One of the reasons it's critical is for their online stores. Does anybody know how many SKUs, so products, that Amazon has listed? 356 million different products. Do you know how many are in a typical store? Somewhere between 2,000 and 50,000. So what you're used to doing when you shop is looking at, let's say, 50,000 products, and when you go to Amazon, you're looking at 356 million. Of course, they've got to be predicting what you want. Because whatever they put on that first screen is what you're going to buy. And if you don't find it there, you're going to go look someplace else. The old joke of where's the best place to hide a piece of data that you don't want anybody to find? On the second page of the Google search, right? Amazon knows that. If it's on the second page of the Amazon search, you're not going to go there. You're going to go someplace else. So they've got to predict demand. And the brick and mortar know this too. Add that in now with new labor pools that are available, and they're very readily available at the times that we're seeing high demand, which is evening, right? Because everybody wants to be a late cutoff, same day sort of delivery, and weekends. And you say, all right, how would that then change delivery? Instead of all that content coming into the network, being sorted and going out from the sortation centers every morning at 8 a.m. to do 200 to 400 deliveries, how could you use an artificial intelligence-powered optimization engine to do that locally? And what we find is it looks something like this, that instead of going into the network and out, the postman or the delivery agent gets their first assignment for the day, and they're told to go and pick up 4 packages from a local retailer. And then deliver 2 on their way to pick up 4 more, and then deliver 3, and then pick up 8, and deliver 6, and pick up 19, and deliver 3. And they go on this continuous, optimized, dynamic delivery that eliminates almost all of the non-value-added activity. A lot of those startups that we talked about earlier are experimenting with things like this, but none of them have the engine, right? This artificial intelligence engine, but more importantly, none of them have the network that you have. And so you put this dynamic capability on top of your low-cost, efficient, highly optimized postal network, and now you have something that is extremely market relevant and almost impossible to beat from a cost and capability standpoint in the market. And it's what I call the Amazon antidote. Because this is what Amazon is building. Right? They're out there putting this in place today. And every other retailer is asking, how can we do this without having to subsidize delivery to the tune of $7 billion a year? And that's what Amazon's doing, right? You could be the answer that all the retailers are looking for. And as I talk to my retail clients about this concept, they say, if somebody has this, bring them to my door. Because I want to talk to them, I need this. This is how I compete with Amazon. You are the best placed in every geography in the world to be able to do that. And it all comes down to using your network with data in different ways. Stop guessing, start knowing. So to wrap up, and I realize I'm probably well over time, these are the areas to focus on. You've got to work on your core while pivoting to the new, and these are hard things to balance, but you've got to balance them as you look at unlocking that trap value by using data in a different way that's not about a bunch of investment and a bunch of cost, but it's about doing the things you do today in a much smarter way. Thank you for inviting me and for spending some time with me today.